What you're about to see has never happened before in the history of the Royal Guard. A midnight operation, a sealed container, bound for America, and inside it, the stolen Coronation Scepter of the late Queen. How did a ceremonial guard, trained never to speak, never to move, end up confronting Donald Trump's security detail at a fog-soaked London dock? And why was his calm defiance enough to bring an entire international shipment to a halt? Watch as the floodlights blaze on, the steel door opens, and one quiet step forward changes everything. Because when the crown is threatened, sometimes even the stillest man in Britain moves. So before we reveal what they found, like the video, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. The rain had turned to mist by the time Sergeant Ewan Hart was summoned to the upper floor of Wellington Barracks. The call had come without fanfare. A brief knock on his quarters, a junior officer with an unreadable face, and a simple directive, full dress, report upstairs. Hart hadn't asked questions. In the life of a Coldstream guard, you learned to interpret silence. And tonight, the silence carried weight. He climbed the stone staircase in near total quiet. The corridor smelled faintly of boot polish and pipe smoke, the scent of old authority. At the end stood Major Braithwaite, waiting beside a heavy oak door. Inside, 3 men stood. One was the palace liaison, the other, a senior official from the cabinet office. The third was in civilian clothing, dark suit, coat still wet from the rain, holding a document wallet sealed with the royal crest. "Sergeant Hart," the civilian said without preamble, "by direct order of the Sovereign, you are to lead a detachment to the Tilbury docks. You will be operating under royal warrant. Immediate departure. Your objective will be explained on site." Hart's brows furrowed, just slightly, but he gave no reply. The man stepped forward and unsealed the folder. Inside, beneath a red ribbon, lay a vellum-backed document stamped with the official wax seal of the Crown. Not a copy. The original, hand-signed. "You'll find your detachment already briefed and suited. 5 guards, full ceremonial uniform. You are to follow the warrant to the letter. Is that understood?" Hart nodded once. "Understood, sir." The man handed him the folder and turned without another word. Minutes later, Hart moved swiftly through the parade square, the drizzle beading across his bearskin hat. He reached the motor pool where a dark green transport lorry idled under the overhang. His men were already inside, scarlet tunics worn over body armour, bayonets gleaming, expressions unreadable. Corporal Ainsley, his second in command, leaned out from the passenger seat. "This for real, Sergeant?" Hart didn't answer immediately. He climbed in, secured the warrant inside his chest plate, and looked straight ahead. "We move in silence," he said quietly. "No speculation, no noise. Whatever this is, we don't disgrace it." The vehicle pulled away from the barracks, wheels hissing across wet asphalt. Behind them, the palace spires were barely visible through the low fog. None of the men spoke for the next 40 minutes, because none of them had ever left their post for a mission like this, and none of them had ever seen a royal warrant signed in blue ink. At Tilbury docks, the wind carried the taste of salt and diesel. Container cranes stood like skeletal sentinels over the wide berths. Sodium floodlights hummed overhead, casting long amber shadows across the slick concrete. Most of the port had gone quiet for the night, save for the occasional screech of steel on steel, cargo locking into place, unseen in the maze of towers. But at berth 7, activity was curiously deliberate. 5 black Chevrolet Suburbans idled side by side, each one wearing UK diplomatic plates. Their engines purred low, as if trying not to be noticed. A small cluster of men stood nearby, suits under raincoats, earpieces barely visible, talking into microphones clenched at the collar. One of the dock officers, an older man with a clipboard and a permanent scowl, glanced sideways as he passed. He recognized the security pattern. This wasn't just embassy staff. An American VIP was moving something through the port. "Packages priority," one of the suits muttered into his mouth. "No customs. Cleared at level 4. The dock officer paused at the corner. He'd worked this port for 27 years, and he'd never heard level 4 clearance used outside of nuclear fuel transits. Something wasn't sitting right. Then came the sound. Low at first, distant engine rumble. He turned. A British military truck was pulling through the eastern access gate. High suspension, matte finish, no insignia beyond the red sash of the household division displayed discreetly on the windshield. The guard behind the wheel didn't glance left or right. Behind the lorry, a second vehicle trailed with hazard lights blinking. The American agents stiffened. One of them reached for his belt radio. "What's this?" he said, voice clipped. "They're not scheduled," another replied, already moving toward the lead Suburban. From the shadows, more eyes emerged. Dockside port security, plainclothes Met officers, even a local journalist who'd been tipped off about a diplomatic transfer happening under cover of darkness. Within moments, the stillness fractured. Doors opened. Boots stepped down, scarlet red. 5 Coldstream guards formed a single silent line beside the lorry, bearskins high under the buzz of halogen light. At their front, Sergeant Ewan Hart, warrant in hand, unreadable as stone. The Americans hesitated. This wasn't ceremonial. This was something else, and something told them, whatever it was, had come with the Crown's authority. Sergeant Hart approached the Americans with the composure of a man walking into a church. Not fast, not slow, just deliberate. The ground beneath his boots was slick with oil and river mist, but he didn't break stride. Behind him, the line of guards remained still, eyes forward, hands gripping their rifles vertically in parade rest. A man in a tailored overcoat stepped forward from the convoy. He wasn't military, but his posture gave him away. Former intelligence, likely private security now, and used to being in charge. "This is private clearance," the man said flatly, holding up a lanyard with a silver crest. "Diplomatic load. I don't know what ceremonial unit this is, but you're not authorized to be here." Hart didn't answer. Instead, he produced the royal warrant, still sealed, and broke it open before the man's eyes. He unfolded it with precision, not to make a show of it, but because paper like that deserved to be held properly. "This document," Hart said calmly, "grants Her Majesty's Guard access to and authority over any outbound container identified by the Office of the Crown Jeweller under registry prefix ALP 7327. The man didn't blink. "You're intercepting a diplomatic shipment," he said, lowering his voice. Hart's reply came low and level. "We're recovering Crown property." Behind them, floodlights shifted slightly as one of the dock cranes rotated with a groan, casting sweeping shadows across the berth. The distant hum of a generator stuttered. "Let's not escalate," the American said. "Whatever this is, it can be resolved at the political level. I'm sure Buckingham would prefer discretion." "That," Hart said, "is above my rank." He folded the warrant and tucked it into the inside panel of his tunic. 2 of his men peeled off without a word and walked toward the manifest terminal, boots striking concrete like a metronome. One of the port officers had already approached them, uncertain but cooperating. Now murmurs were rising from the press pen across the fence. A camera flash went off, then another. The American stepped closer. "Do you know whose shipment this is?" Hart didn't look at him. His eyes were on the crates behind them. "We do." A second SUV door opened, and a taller man in a charcoal suit emerged, speaking quickly into a phone. Another guard, clearly ex-military, adjusted his coat and placed a hand near his hip. Hart turned, gestured subtly, and his detachment adjusted formation. Not threatening, just precise. The Americans were ready to bluff, but the Royal Guard was not a pawn, and tonight they weren't standing still. The container sat at the edge of berth 7, its green sides streaked with rust, water stains running down like dried tears. The serial number, ALP 7327, matched the warrant. Sergeant Hart didn't speak. He simply nodded to Corporal Ainsley, who stepped forward with a bolt cutter in hand. The metal lock, thick and frostbitten, snapped with a crack that echoed down the empty dock. From behind the black SUVs, one of the Americans moved forward sharply. "You do this, Sergeant, and it's international territory you're stepping on." Hart's gaze didn't move. "This isn't international. It's royal." The guards took position, forming a perimeter around the container. Dock workers stood at a respectful distance. Even the port police remained on the sidelines, watching. No one wanted to be the one to interfere with a document carrying the sovereign's signature. With a screech of steel hinges, the right-hand door swung open. Inside, silence. No booby traps, no alarms, just crates, stacked in a deliberate maze of foam and velvet. The lighting was poor. Only the floodlights from the cranes above offered illumination, but among the mundane-looking cargo, a long, coffin-shaped chest stood out. Mahogany casing, gold trim, no markings, no labels. 2 guards stepped in, carefully, respectfully. Hart followed, his boots thudding lightly on the metal flooring. The guards pried open the lid. Inside, it was lined with deep royal blue velvet, and at its centre lay an object none of them had ever expected to see outside a palace vault. Wrapped in aged, crushed velvet, not storage cloth, but ceremonial presentation fabric, was the Coronation Scepter. The rod of gold gleamed dully under the floodlight, its orb set with a sapphire, its crown mounted with a diamond the size of a fingernail. It had once rested in the hand of the late Queen on Coronation Day, an emblem of continuity stretching back to 1661. Everyone in the crate went still. One of the younger guards' breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. Hart stepped forward. He didn't touch it. He simply looked. Then, from behind, a voice. "Step away from the artifact." One of the American agents, broader now, more assertive, moved forward, hand raised. Corporal Ainsley blocked his path with a silent sidestep, rifle held low but firm. "This can be resolved behind closed doors," the man insisted. "We're not looking to embarrass anyone." But Hart finally did something no one expected. He lifted the scepter, slowly, reverently, and stepped into the light. Gasps rippled from the fence line as a dozen cameras clicked in succession, the scepter's head catching the floodlight in a sudden blaze of gold and gemstone fire. A journalist muttered, "Oh my God, it's real." And just like that, the entire dock went silent. The missing treasure of the crown was no longer lost. It was standing under a searchlight in the hands of a man who hadn't blinked all night. The velvet caught the mist in the air as Sergeant Hart stepped down from the container. He didn't lift the scepter high. He didn't present it to the cameras. He simply held it at chest level, horizontally, respectfully, like an item too sacred to be shown off. From behind the barricades, the scene snapped into chaos. Reporters called out questions. Flashes fired like lightning. A drone buzzed overhead before being swatted from the air by a port police signal jammer. But at the centre of the chaos stood a stillness. 5 royal guards, silent in formation, eyes forward, their scarlet tunics brilliant against the grey docks. The only sound near them was the soft clink of ceremonial medals as they moved into position of their sergeant. "Sir," Corporal Ainsley said, "Port Control's asking for lockdown orders. They want to secure the entire berth." Hart gave a single nod. To the left, the Americans had regrouped. Their posture had shifted, not confrontational anymore, but wary. The discovery had changed something. They were now the ones improvising. A tall man with salt and pepper hair stepped forward from their group, holding a phone against his chest. His voice was practiced, calm, official. "We'd like a word. Off the record." Hart didn't move. "Then you'll need to find someone without a warrant in his tunic." The man exhaled slowly. "This will have consequences." Hart's reply was almost gentle. "Then I hope they're ceremonial." Inside the command trailer, hastily erected on site, the Port Authority chief was already on the phone with Whitehall. Scotland Yard had been notified. A liaison from the Crown Jeweller's office was en route. Hart remained outside. He stood with the scepter cradled in both arms like a fallen banner. A silence grew between the two factions, British and American. Not hostile, not warm, just mutually uncertain. Diplomacy now belonged to people in suits. The uniformed men had done what they came to do. Then, without instruction, one of the port workers removed his cap. The next did the same. It spread like a ripple. A dock full of ordinary men and women uncovering their heads in the presence of something ancient, something real. One of the journalists, a younger man with a regional outlet, whispered into his mic, "We're looking now at what appears to be a recovery operation, and possibly a scandal." Another muttered, Trump's name was on the original Shipment manifest. No aliases. By then Scotland Yard was 10 minutes out, but the front page had already been written, and the picture was already taken. Weeks earlier, the palace had gone still. Not the public facade, not the balcony waves, the gun salutes or the state carriages, but the inner halls, the archive rooms, the vaults. After the Queen's passing, the transition had begun, slow, reverent and chaotic all at once. The royal collection, a treasure trove stretching across centuries, was being inspected piece by piece for the accession ceremonies to come. And that was when the sceptre of the sovereign's power, the very one last held in the Queen's gloved hand on Coronation Day, failed to appear on inventory. It was assumed misplaced. Inside the palace, such things happen more often than the public like to believe. With hundreds of ceremonial objects rotating between vaults, museums, exhibitions, and hidden chapels, it wasn't unusual for an item to vanish for days. But not this. Not the Coronation Scepter. Security officers were brought in, quietly, no police, no press. The Crown Jeweller triple-checked their logs. Names were listed, initials circled, rooms sealed off. There were no signs of forced entry, no ransom notes, just absence. A palace footman recalled seeing it before the final state vigil, wrapped carefully, set aside for cleaning. Another whispered, hesitantly, that an American cultural attaché had been given an unusual level of access during the week of the funeral. But there were no accusations. Not yet. Instead, a slow dread settled over the office of the Lord Chamberlain. The public could never know. Not during this time of mourning. Not when the entire country was preparing for a new monarch to receive the instruments of state, the orb, the crown, the ring, and the missing sceptre. Sergeant Hart had heard nothing. It wasn't the kind of failure a palace admitted to its own guards. But somewhere between then and now, someone high enough had decided it was time to act. Quietly, firmly, and without negotiation. Hence the warrant, hence the truck. Hence the unexpected presence of 5 scarlet uniforms at a midnight freight terminal, reclaiming something far older than any man on the dock. Something that wasn't just a symbol of royal authority, but proof that continuity had not been broken. The clock struck 2:41 a.m. The dock hadn't been this quiet in years. The container that once threatened to slip across the Atlantic now stood sealed again, but this time under watch. A ring of Coldstream guards held the perimeter. The sceptre, returned to its velvet cradle, rested inside a secure mobile crate marked for cultural evidence handling. A dull fog crept in from the Thames. It rolled across the tarmac like breath from the river's lungs. The floodlights flickered occasionally as mist tangled in the beams, giving the berth an almost dreamlike glow. Inside the temporary field tent, port control buzzed with muffled voices and half-lit computer screens. Satellite phones had been passed around. An officer from the yard was already en route in a blacked-out SUV from Westminster. But outside, in the cold air where cameras could still snap from behind barriers, Sergeant Hart remained at his post. He hadn't spoken in nearly half an hour. Corporal Ainsley returned from a conversation with the Met liaison. They're locking down the North Terminal. American legal reps been pulled into a sealed conference call. Hart didn't move his eyes from the horizon. "You think we're about to become a headline, sir?" Ainsley asked softly. Hart exhaled through his nose. "We already are." Not far from them, an American aide, younger, flustered, paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. "This is above me," he was saying into the handset. They opened the crate. "Yes, I saw it with my own eyes." No, I'm not confirming that in writing. I'm telling you what I saw." He turned toward Hart briefly, as if trying to decide whether to speak, then didn't. Further down the quay, 2 younger guards stood in formation. Their rifles remained vertical, fingers near but never on the trigger. One of them, barely 20, whispered without turning his head, "I've never guarded anything except gates and tourists." The other replied, "You just guarded the crown jewels from being smuggled out in a shipping crate." A pause. "You think they'll say anything about this publicly?" "No." "You think the sergeant ever blinks?" Another pause. "No." They didn't smile, but their eyes flickered with something close. Inside the container, moisture beaded gently on the velvet. Outside, headlines were already forming in newsrooms across 3 continents, based on a photo, a silhouette, and a single word whispered on the wires: recovered. And still Hart didn't move, because that wasn't his job. His job was to remain, even when everyone else wanted the moment to pass. By 5:12 a.m, the docks began to glow with that pale blue light that comes before the sun. It was the hour when even the most hardened workers paused, staring toward the river, uncertain if they were witnessing history or dreaming it. The guards hadn't moved from their formation. Their rifles still gleamed faintly in the damp air. The container, now considered a cultural crime scene, stood behind them like a sealed tomb. Then came the arrival. A dark, unmarked Land Rover approached the cordon at slow speed, escorted by a single Met cruiser. The man who stepped out wore no uniform, but everyone recognised him. Inspector Edward Marsh, Crown Cultural Recovery Unit, Scotland Yard. No press conference, no red carpet, just a clipboard, a gloved hand, and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses that fogged slightly as he stepped into the mist. "Sergeant Hart?" he asked. Hart stepped forward, presenting the warrant once again. No flourish, just duty. The inspector reviewed it, carefully, silently. Then he looked into Hart's eyes. There was no salute, but the nod that passed between them felt older than protocol. "The crate is ready for transport," Hart said. The two walked together toward the container, where the velvet-wrapped scepter had been placed into a reinforced archival case, lined in acid-free silk and fitted with a biometric lock. Hart reached down, gloved hands brushing the velvet, and then, under the rising light of the London sky, he lifted it one final time. Gasps came from behind the barricades. A few claps began, quickly hushed by the seriousness of the moment. Reporters raised their phones, but no one shouted questions. No one dared interrupt. Hart stepped forward slowly. Each boot step echoed with the heaviness of tradition. He reached the inspector, paused, and laid the case in his arms with a precision that bordered on reverence. "Thank you," Inspector Marsh said quietly. Hart didn't reply. The inspector turned, returned to the Land Rover, and the vehicle began to move, slowly at first, then disappearing into the dawn haze, toward the vaults beneath Westminster. A drone camera caught the moment from above, a single crimson figure standing alone on a grey dock, the light just beginning to cut through the fog behind him. That frame would be on every front page by sunrise. And every commentator would ask the same question: how close did Britain come to losing one of its oldest treasures without a shot being fired? The world woke to an image it didn't know how to explain. Across front pages from London to New York, a single frame was repeated, a royal guard, expression unreadable, walking a velvet case through a haze of morning fog at Tilbury docks. "The Crown recovered," read the Times. "How did the scepter vanish?" asked Le Monde. "Trump tied to secret shipment," blared the Washington Post, followed quickly by a more cautious clarification forthcoming within the hour. Downing Street gave no official comment. Buckingham Palace said only that a missing ceremonial item of historical significance has been returned to royal custody. No names, no drama, just carefully chosen words meant to calm without confirming. But the internet wasn't as quiet. Footage leaked of the dockside confrontation. Photos circulated of the black SUVs. Some even zoomed in on shipping manifests, showing personal cargo, executive transfer, D. Trump listed in small grainy print. Late that afternoon, a statement was released by Trump's legal team in Florida. They called it a gross misunderstanding, claiming the crate had been part of a cultural appreciation that had been pre-approved by royal intermediaries. No one could produce the approval. No one could name the intermediary. Parliament began murmurs of an inquiry. In Washington, a spokesperson sidestepped every question. But for most people, ordinary citizens, veterans, and the thousands who had lined the Mall during the Queen's funeral, none of that mattered. Because the image said it all. The guard didn't pose, he didn't speak, he didn't blink into the lens. He simply carried a piece of Britain's soul back from the edge of disappearance without flinching. It didn't matter who had tried to take it. What mattered was who stood in the way and didn't move. The gates of Buckingham Palace clicked open at precisely 6:00 p.m. Tourists crowded along the wrought iron fence, phones lifted high, children on shoulders, all waiting for the evening change of the Queen's Guard, a ritual as predictable as clockwork, as theatrical as any West End production. They didn't notice the man in the second line. Same scarlet tunic, same white belt, same bearskin hat. But his shoulders held something different. Sergeant Ewan Hart stood motionless beneath the Union Jack as it flapped gently above the palace roof, his eyes faced forward, fixed on the horizon. The rifle rested against his shoulder as it always had. His boots never shifted. The crowd snapped photos. A few clapped, not knowing why. One American tourist whispered, "How do they stand so still for so long?" None of them knew that just hours earlier, this same man had walked through a media storm with a stolen crown artifact under his arm and 5 nations watching, and yet here he was, at his post, as if nothing had happened. A younger guardsman beside him, no older than 25, broke the silence between shifts as the bell tolled from the clock tower behind the arch. "Strange," he murmured. "Feels like the world turned upside down last." Hart didn't reply. The guardsman glanced sideways. "Don't you ever want to talk about it?" Still nothing. Then, so quiet it was nearly lost to the breeze, Hart said, "We don't talk about duty." The guardsman blinked. "Then what do we talk about?" Hart's eyes didn't move. "We don't." The bells finished their toll. The commander barked a single word. "Advance!" The squad marched, and behind them the gates of the palace closed once again. To the world, they were just ceremonial men in funny hats. But every now and then, under orders no one ever heard, one of them would leave the gates. And when they did, history remembered. What would you have done if you were in Sergeant Hart's place, facing off against foreign security, with a stolen royal treasure in reach? And do you think the crown should have gone public with the discovery, or kept it buried behind closed doors? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a moment of quiet defiance or royal drama. And don't forget to share this video with someone who loves history, tradition, or just a good standoff in the fog. Our previous stories should be on your screen now. Go watch them next, and I'll see you tomorrow at the same time with a brand new story.